Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much? Well, Harry and Meghan have never provided any evidence for that highly incendiary claim.
Many who follow the royal family know Meghan Markle as a bold and outspoken figure, but few see the pressure building behind the scenes. Beyond the polished interviews and public appearances, a new controversy is taking shape. Reports now claim that Piers Morgan has revealed details about Archie and Lilibet that have sparked fresh questions and intense reactions. The situation is quickly gaining attention and raising doubts about privacy, truth, and image. What exactly was exposed in this investigation? And how will it affect Meghan's already complicated relationship with the public? Piers Morgan's explosive allegations about Meghan. Meghan's story starts in a way people have come to expect from her. The Portland Hospital, a private hospital known for caring for women and children, has a long connection to the royal family. Several of Prince Harry's cousins were born there, but this time things felt different. People were more curious and more suspicious. Leading the criticism was Piers Morgan, who didn't hold back at all. When new claims appeared suggesting that Meghan Markle's pregnancy story might not be consistent, or might even have been carefully planned, Piers reacted strongly. On his show, he leaned forward, hit the desk, and asked, "So, which part was real? Any of it?" He argued that the public image of the Sussexes was falling apart. According to him, their reputation, already under pressure, was taking another major hit. He said the timing made things worse, as their public story had already been struggling for months. He even called the situation the biggest contradiction of all. In his view, Meghan's story didn't just have small mistakes, it had major conflicts. He claimed there were internal notes, mixed-up timelines, statements that didn't match, and photos that raised questions. To him, this showed that moments of motherhood were being carefully planned, just like public appearances, controlled lighting, perfect angles, and a clear message. He also pointed out that photographers and reporters were watching closely. Photos and videos seemed inconsistent. Sometimes the baby bump looked higher, sometimes lower. Sometimes she held it carefully, other times not at all. While many people understand that clothes, posture, and camera angles can create these differences, Piers argued it wasn't just coincidence, it was part of a strategy. He claimed the public timeline of the pregnancy didn't match what was happening behind the scenes. According to him, the secrecy wasn't just about privacy. It was meant to distract people. Every confusing detail, every unanswered question, he said, was part of a carefully shaped story designed to gain sympathy. Piers went further, saying that an insider had revealed the real timeline, notes, schedules, and hospital records that didn't match Meghan's public story. He claimed dates were wrong, appearances didn't fit the stages of pregnancy, and some hospital visits didn't line up with where she was seen publicly. According to these claims, even the calm hospital arrival story might not have been accurate. Growing more frustrated, Piers slammed his papers and said he was tired of being told to accept every version of Meghan's story without question. He also said he was tired of being labeled a conspiracy theorist for pointing out what he believed were obvious inconsistencies. He described Meghan not as someone being controlled by the royal family, but as someone controlling the narrative herself, using her pregnancy to gain sympathy, silence critics, and shape public opinion. According to him, staff were working extra hours, handling unusual requests, and carefully managing every detail. He argued that this wasn't about privacy, but about control. He listed more examples: claims of severe morning sickness while still appearing energetic in public, statements about feeling isolated while staff records showed constant support, and dramatic moments at events followed by normal activity shortly after. To him, it all looked rehearsed, more like a performance than real life. Even the birth story, he claimed, had different versions prepared in advance, ready to be used depending on how the media reacted. He compared it to a film production with everything planned ahead of time. He also brought up the famous interview with Oprah Winfrey, saying the timing, emotion, and delivery felt carefully designed to create a strong reaction. Reading from the supposed insider notes, he described a situation where everything, from staff actions to public appearances, was focused on how things looked, not just what was real. As these claims spread, the internet reacted strongly. Some people defended Meghan, calling the accusations unfair and biased. Others felt it was time for more accountability. Meanwhile, Piers appeared confident and challenged her to respond. But Meghan stayed silent. There were no statements, no interviews, and no public replies. For Piers, that silence made his argument stronger. He used it to keep the conversation going. Online, opinions began to shift. Some supporters started asking questions. Others who had defended her went quiet. Piers continued to highlight what he saw as contradictions, building more attention around the story. One of his biggest claims was that there were multiple pre-written versions of the birth story, all designed to control how the public would see it. How did the pregnancy controversy impact the royal family? Will it divide the monarchy? Let's take a closer look. The pregnancy controversy that split the monarchy. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped out of the famous Lindo wing just a few hours after giving birth, looking remarkably polished and composed. She wore high heels, her hair was neatly styled, and her makeup looked flawless, as if she had simply stepped out for a formal event, rather than having just welcomed a new life into the world. Cradling her newborn gently in her arms, she paused for photographs, allowing the public a first glimpse of the baby. And this wasn't a one-time moment. She repeated the same graceful appearance 3 different times after each of her children was born. Every time she looked calm, steady, and radiant, as though she fully understood the importance of the moment. These appearances quickly became iconic, shaping the public's idea of what modern royal motherhood looks like: dignified, open, and shared with the world. But this was never really about fashion or appearance. It wasn't about trying to impress anyone. Instead, it reflected something deeper. It showed a sense of duty, respect for royal tradition, and a willingness to include the public in a deeply personal and joyful moment. For many people watching, it felt like an honest and heartfelt gesture, a way of saying, "This happiness belongs to all of us." On the other hand, Meghan Markle seemed to approach her pregnancy in a completely different way, one that felt far less clear and, to some observers, almost puzzling. Instead of a straightforward and open journey, it began to feel more like a story full of shifting details, where each new appearance raised fresh questions. At times, her baby bump appeared very noticeable, large, round, and impossible to ignore. She often held it with both hands, moving slowly and carefully, as though she was protecting something delicate. When she sat down, she lowered herself gently. When she walked, each step seemed measured, as if she had to think about every movement. Her posture and behavior gave the impression that she was carrying something extremely fragile that needed constant care. But then, quite suddenly, everything seemed to change. Within just a few days, or sometimes even in the same week, new photos would emerge where the bump looked noticeably smaller, flatter, or positioned differently. These changes weren't subtle. They were striking enough to catch people's attention immediately. Of course, some might argue that camera angles, lighting, or clothing could explain these differences. But royal watchers, people who have followed royal families for years, even generations, are used to observing these details. They understand how pregnancy typically progresses, especially under constant media coverage. So when something appears inconsistent, it doesn't go unnoticed. The way she moved added even more confusion. In some moments, she appeared extremely cautious, walking slowly, holding her stomach tightly, and moving as if even small actions required effort. Yet in other appearances, she seemed completely different. She climbed stairs quickly, turned her body with ease, bent down without hesitation, and walked confidently, even in high heels, as though nothing was restricting her at all. It wasn't just that her condition seemed to change. It was how quickly it changed. Pregnancy can vary from person to person, that's true. But these were not gradual differences developing over weeks or months. These were sudden shifts happening within days, sometimes even within hours. In one appearance, she looked heavily pregnant, moving with visible care. In the next, she appeared almost energetic and unrestricted, as if her body felt completely normal. Naturally, people began to take a closer look. Screenshots were captured. Photos were placed side by side. Timelines were created to track each appearance. And when everything was laid out clearly, the differences became harder and harder to ignore. This wasn't just about one unusual photo that could be explained away. It seemed to be a repeated pattern. In moments where cameras were perfectly positioned, she appeared visibly pregnant. But in other situations, she seemed far more mobile and less restricted. As often happens online, once people began focusing on these details, the conversation grew rapidly. Discussions spread across forums and social media. Comment sections filled up with people asking the same question in different ways, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Over time, a quiet but uncomfortable idea began to take shape in the minds of some observers, something many were hesitant to say out loud. The photos alone had already raised doubts for them. But when Piers Morgan later mentioned alleged documents, for many people, whatever uncertainty or benefit of the doubt remained seemed to fade away completely. How could a baby bump seem to change so much in such a short time? How could someone struggle to move one day, yet appear completely free and comfortable the next? Let's take a closer look. The mystery of Archie's birth. According to claims that later came out and were never clearly denied, something unsettling seemed to be happening behind the scenes. Quietly, out of public view, internal notes about schedules were said to be moving around among staff. These notes reportedly listed Meghan Markle's appointments, daily movements, and official duties throughout her pregnancy. At first, this might not sound unusual. After all, public figures often have busy, well-organized schedules. But if those notes were real, even partly, they didn't just raise a few questions about the public story. They completely turned it upside down. According to these reports, the notes showed hospital appointments booked on the very same days Meghan was clearly seen attending public events across London. And these were not quick appearances or rushed moments that could be explained away. These were full days, fully documented. On paper, she was supposed to be in one place, while clear photographs showed her somewhere entirely different. And that creates a very simple, unavoidable problem. No one can be in two places at once. Pregnancy timelines are not something you can easily adjust. You cannot shift medical appointments around the way you would move a business meeting. You cannot delay or fast-forward being 9 months pregnant just because your schedule is busy. The human body does not follow public image plans. That contradiction alone made many people stop and think. But then another detail came out, one that surprised even those who had not been paying close attention. Through trusted sources and carefully shared stories, Meghan had often suggested that she planned to have a home birth at Frogmore Cottage. This idea matched perfectly with the image she seemed to be creating. It felt natural, private, and deeply personal. It also looked like a quiet way of stepping away from royal tradition and doing things on her own terms instead of following long-established rules. Most people accepted this story without question. Then came May 6, 2019. Without warning, without explanation, and without even a short statement to prepare the public, it was suddenly announced that she had given birth at Portland Hospital in London instead. To be clear, giving birth in a hospital is completely normal, and often the safest choice. That was never the issue, and most people understood that. The real issue was the silence that followed. There was no explanation. Not even a simple sentence about why the plan had changed. No mention of medical advice. No acknowledgement that the story people had believed had suddenly taken a sharp turn. Nothing at all. Just silence. Loud, uncomfortable, and hard to ignore. When someone creates a very public story about their life, especially one built around values like privacy, natural living, and independence, people naturally expect at least a brief explanation when things suddenly change. But none came. The palace said nothing. Meghan said nothing. The story simply shifted, almost as if the original plan had never been mentioned, as if everyone was expected to forget it completely. That silence had a powerful effect. It made people look back. They began watching old interviews again, reading past statements more carefully and checking timelines more closely. Slowly, questions started to grow. If one major part of the story could disappear without explanation, what else might not have been as clear or as truthful as it seemed? And that is where Piers Morgan stepped in, and he did not hold back. This was the moment that truly divided public opinion. According to him, there were multiple versions of Archie's birth announcement already written before the baby had even arrived. But who schedules parenthood like a corporate marketing strategy? Who prepares different editions of their child's birth announcement the same way a company launches a product? Let's investigate further. Royal birth announcement that sparked Meghan's story. The Buckingham Palace timing fiasco peeled back the curtain, exposing just how meticulously orchestrated this entire event really was. Prince Harry and Meghan did not notify Buckingham Palace when Meghan went into labor. Instead, they kept the news entirely under wraps. Hours passed after the baby's birth, and only at 6 a.m. did they finally inform the official royal communications team. By then, Buckingham Palace was completely blindsided. With no warning and almost no details, palace officials scrambled to issue a public announcement just 40 minutes later. But almost immediately, that announcement collapsed. Harry and Meghan's own version of events claimed the baby had been born several hours earlier, directly contradicting the information the palace had just released. Suddenly, Buckingham Palace looked incompetent. To the public, it seemed as if they were either lying or utterly disorganized. But the reality was far more damaging. They had been deliberately shut out. They were kept in the dark on purpose. This was not a simple oversight. It was not confusion or miscommunication. This was a calculated move by Harry and Meghan, designed to make the palace appear dishonest, while they remained seemingly innocent. They controlled the timing, the narrative, and the fallout. Piers Morgan pounced on this story immediately, and for good reason. It revealed a crucial truth about how Meghan operated. Every detail had to be tightly managed, every announcement had to happen on her schedule, and every piece of information had to serve her image and her story. This was not a mother joyfully sharing a life-changing moment. This was someone orchestrating a performance, controlling every angle, even if it meant making Buckingham Palace look bad. Once people noticed the level of planning, they could not unsee it. The fairy tale began to crack, revealing a far more calculated and deliberate picture than most were willing to accept. This is where Meghan's victim narrative started to unravel. During her interview with Oprah, she painted a heart-rending image of her pregnancy. Abandoned by palace staff, isolated, unsupported, and forced to endure a cold, uncaring institution. It was emotional, compelling, and millions of viewers sympathized deeply with someone who appeared utterly alone. But then internal memos began leaking, and they told a very different story. According to documents no one has successfully denied, palace staff were instructed to meet every single one of Meghan's requests. Not later, not when convenient, but immediately. Staff reportedly rearranged schedules, canceled pre-existing commitments, and worked double shifts to manage last-minute wardrobe changes and sudden demands. This was not neglect. It was an institution bending over backward to satisfy one person. The most revealing detail involved meetings and briefings. According to the records, Meghan was invited to attend important discussions and planning sessions multiple times, and she declined several of them. She simply chose not to attend. Yet later, those same absences were presented publicly as exclusion. Doors allegedly slammed in her face, deliberate freezes by the palace. The truth? The doors were wide open. Meghan chose not to walk through them, then claimed she had been locked out. That is not victimhood. That is strategic manipulation at the highest level. Piers Morgan repeatedly made this point. This was not oppression. It was indulgence being rebranded as abuse. The palace gave her what she asked for, broke rules to accommodate her in ways no one else would have been allowed, and pushed staff to their absolute limits to make her comfortable. And after all of that effort, after bending rules, breaking protocol, and exhausting themselves, she turned to the world and said she had been mistreated, abandoned, and left to suffer. If the memos are accurate, and no one has denied their existence, they show not a woman ignored by palace staff, but exhausted staff running themselves ragged trying to satisfy someone who could never be pleased. That revelation fundamentally shifted public opinion. The story changed from "she was mistreated" to "she was accommodated beyond reason and still claimed to be a victim." Once people began seeing the pattern, the constant reshaping of reality to fit a personal narrative, the foundation of her entire story began to crumble. And once that doubt entered the public conversation, everything else started to unravel. What other secrets has she been keeping, and how did she react? Let's take a closer look. Meghan's silence reaction. Amid all the swirling claims, the contradictions being pointed out everywhere, and the piles of so-called evidence being presented, Meghan's response was nothing. Complete silence. No carefully worded statement. No spokesperson rushing to defend her. No celebrity friends stepping in like they usually do. No explanation from the palace. No legal threats. Absolutely nothing. For someone who has always been quick to fight back against stories she didn't like, someone who has sued newspapers over unflattering reports, whose friends have repeatedly briefed the press on her behalf, this silence was shocking. Its absence spoke louder than any statement ever could. Naturally, Piers Morgan, being Piers Morgan, hammered this point again and again on every platform he could find. His argument was clear: silence is not neutral. Silence is not the high road. Silence sends a message, and when serious allegations backed by supposed proof are involved, it speaks very loudly. You could see it happening online in real time. People who had once defended Meghan fiercely, who shouted that any criticism of her was racist or sexist, began to hesitate. Comments shifted from "this is just media bullying" to "wait, if this isn't true, why isn't she saying anything? Why doesn't she explain?" The longer she stayed silent, the louder those questions became. Meanwhile, critics filled the empty space with analysis, comparisons, and alleged proof. Timelines were reposted, videos examined frame by frame, and internal documents circulated for inspection. With no official response, no one stepping up to say, "this is false," speculation hardened into suspicion. People formed opinions, not because Piers proved anything definitively, but because Meghan's team chose not to refute it. What made this silence even stranger and more damning was Harry's complete absence. This is a man who built his post-royal identity on protecting his family from false stories and invasive media. He had given multiple interviews defending his wife from lies and manipulation. Yet when specific allegations emerged about Meghan's pregnancy and the birth of their children, he said nothing. Not a word. No defense. Not even a vague remark about privacy. Imagine if someone spread lies about your wife faking a pregnancy. Wouldn't you be the first to shout from the rooftops? Hiring lawyers, demanding corrections, doing everything possible to clear her name? But there was nothing. In the court of public opinion, silence like that doesn't come across as dignified restraint. It reads as avoidance. It reads like someone who knows that answering might open up even more problems. Once doubts took hold in people's minds, everything was scrutinized. Even the famous Oprah interview, once untouchable, was no longer safe. Piers dissected it carefully, moment by moment. Pauses seemed too perfect. Tears appeared but never fell, always stopping before ruining the makeup. emotional moments built to crescendos and released exactly when needed, designed for maximum effect. According to Piers, the vulnerability didn't feel spontaneous. It didn't feel fake, but it did feel rehearsed, performed with the precision of someone who knew exactly which emotional notes to hit. Then came the comparisons. Piers lined up the Oprah interview with Meghan's earlier podcast appearances and other interviews. Same pacing, same rhythm, same emotional build-up followed by dramatic release. Same carefully chosen words, same theatrical pauses. To viewers, it no longer seemed like someone spontaneously sharing pain. It looked like a performance perfected over time. Once this pattern was noticed, it was impossible to watch her the same way again. What once felt raw and real now seemed calculated, designed to provoke a reaction. Piers's most controversial point, and the one that enraged supporters while convincing skeptics, was this. Motherhood had become Meghan's shield, her ultimate defense against criticism. By centering her public image around pregnancy, vulnerability, and the pressures of being an expectant mother under media scrutiny, she created what he called a cultural force field. Questioning inconsistencies became socially taboo. Asking for clarity was framed as attacking a pregnant woman. Criticism, no matter how fair, was instantly labeled abuse or bullying. And culturally, the strategy worked perfectly. Society instinctively protects expectant mothers, shows grace, and avoids confrontation. Piers argued that this instinct was being used deliberately. Every time scrutiny intensified, the conversation shifted back to pregnancy stress and emotional hardship. If the facts are truly in her favor, why would it need so much protection? Could there be trust issue? Let's find out. Credibility crisis of Meghan's story. By the time all the details came together, photographs pointing out inconsistencies, supposed documents, odd changes in the story, and a nearly complete silence, the situation had grown far beyond simple debates about pregnancy photos or hospital schedules. This was no longer just about a single event or a single claim. It had turned into a struggle over trust, over credibility, and over whether anything Meghan and Harry said could be accepted at face value anymore. People weren't just questioning small facts, they were beginning to wonder if the entire story was built on a shaky foundation. When people sense that a story doesn't add up, they don't always react with anger. Often, it's subtler than that. Doubt creeps in quietly. It makes people more cautious, more skeptical, more alert to every word, every gesture, every public appearance. That doubt doesn't shout, it lingers. It colors the way millions watch interviews, read statements, and follow the couple's every move. Even small inconsistencies begin to feel significant because, once trust is weakened, every detail is examined under a microscope. The real damage didn't come from a single mistake or one poorly timed statement. It came from the buildup, the steady accumulation of things that didn't quite make sense. Changing timelines, possible scheduling conflicts, carefully staged photo opportunities, announcements that seemed scripted in advance, and the silence when questions were raised, all these things stacked up. Together, they created a picture that many people found difficult to accept, the narrative they were being asked to believe. A story of personal struggle and hardship clashed with the details they were seeing. And when these inconsistencies piled up, the foundation of the story started to crumble. The contrast with other members of the royal family made it even more glaring. Catherine, Princess of Wales, for example, emerged from the hospital just hours after giving birth, 3 separate times, wearing heels, her hair and makeup perfect, gently showing her newborn to the world. She was open, transparent, traditional, and calm. Meghan's approach was very different. She kept much of the story hidden, shifted the narrative several times, left people guessing, and responded with anger when anyone pointed out contradictions. Where openness built trust, secrecy only created suspicion. Where honesty offered clarity, inconsistencies bred doubt. And when questions were met with silence, or worse, accusations of cruelty instead of straightforward answers, people started filling in the blanks themselves, drawing conclusions whether fair or not. Over time, these assumptions hardened into lasting damage that may never fully be ignored. This wasn't a scandal that erupted in one explosive headline. It spread slowly, almost imperceptibly, seeping into public perception until it became impossible to ignore. What do you think about Piers Morgan's shocking revelation about Meghan? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.